Did you know that there are very powerful principles in our Catholic social teaching that hardly come up in our common Catholic discourse? Well, with Pope Leo XIV already drawing attention to them, now is the perfect time to rediscover these hidden gems of our doctrine. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. As you all know, our new Pope, Leo XIV, took his name in honor of Leo XIII, who was the Pope who effectively launched what we now call Catholic social teaching in his seminal encyclical Rerum Novarum. And this choice tells us something. We can expect from our new Pope a particular attentiveness to this part of our doctrine, which is Catholic social teaching. Now, much has been said and written about Catholic social doctrine throughout the years, but when people talk about this topic, they usually mention the classical, well known principles like solidarity, subsidiarity, the common good, or the universal destination of goods, for example. Or they try to apply the principles of Catholic social teaching to hot button political issues of the day. But what if I told you that every single pope since the end of the Second Vatican Council, except obviously John Paul I, who unfortunately only ruled for 33 days, has introduced or developed a unique concept that reshaped Catholic social doctrine in a profound way. And that's what I want to explore with you today. Four principles of Catholic social doctrine that usually go unnoticed. And they are unnoticed not because they're rare, no. Actually, you will find them all over the papal writings and speeches since they were introduced. But they seem more obscure because people rarely talk about them. When they read them, they usually glance over them as if it were just some oddly worded sentences. And yet, they are foundation. They reshaped Catholic social doctrine ever since they appeared. And even when they are not named, you can sense them influencing the teachings of the magisterium from the background. Each one of these principles was a stroke of genius that provided insights that open your horizons in how the church sees society and human person. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Let us start with Pope St. Paul VI. In his seminal encyclical Populorum Progressio, this Pope introduced the concept of integral human development. The whole encyclical is devoted to fleshing out this concept. Paul VI defines development as a transition from less humane conditions to those which are more humane. But this is not the end of the story. In paragraph 14 of Populorum Progressio, Paul VI explains, the development we speak of here cannot be restricted to economic growth alone. To be authentic, it must be well-rounded. It must foster the development of each man and of the whole man. So, of course, human development includes the material because obviously people need to have their material needs met, otherwise, they won't survive. But we must see the human person as a whole. And there's not just material needs, but we must also address other concerns at the psychological, sociological, and spiritual levels. Paul VI explains this beautifully in his encyclical, where he says, What are truly human conditions? The rise from poverty to the acquisition of life's necessities, the elimination of social ills, broadening the horizons of knowledge, acquiring refinement and culture. From there, one can go on to acquire a growing awareness of other people's dignity, a taste for the spirit of poverty, an active interest in the common good, and a desire for peace. Then man can acknowledge the highest values and God Himself, their author and end. Finally, and above all, there is faith, God's gift to men of good will, and our loving unity in Christ, who calls all men to share God's life as sons of the living God, the Father of all men. So we can see a hierarchy here, a progression, if you will, from meeting basic material needs to progressively greater spiritual realities. And the human person can only attain these loftier spiritual realities when they have their material needs met. For example, Paul VI mentions indeed a spirit of poverty, but this is only meaningful when it is freely chosen for holiness' sake, not imposed from the outside by external circumstances. But it would be reductive to just stop the development of the person when their material needs are met. After that is achieved, there are still many steps that the person must develop to attain their full potential. This includes education, access to knowledge and culture, and from there, moral perfection, and finally, the loftier of all values, the faith, communion between God and man. And this integral human development doesn't stop here either. It does not exhaust itself in the individual. But as Paul VI says, it entails a joint effort for the development of the human race as a whole. We must recognize the interdependence among ourselves, our social institutions, our nations, and even the whole humanity. For integral human development to take full effect, we must develop each and every single one of us. And even in his very short pontificate, Pope Leo XIV has already mentioned integral human development several times. And one of those times that I would like to highlight was in a speech to a conference on artificial intelligence, where he says, for its part, the Church wishes to contribute to a serene and informed discussion of these pressing questions by stressing above all the need to weigh the ramifications of AI in light of the integral development of the human person and society. This entails taking into account the well being of the human person, not only materially, but also intellectually and spiritually. It means safeguarding the inviolable dignity of each human person and respecting the cultural and spiritual riches and diversity of the world's peoples. Moving on to St. John Paul II, I would like to bring in the idea of what he called structures of sin. In Solicitudo Rei Socialis, the social encyclical that John Paul II wrote to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Populorum Progressio, this Pope wrote, structures of sin are rooted in personal sin, and thus always linked to the concrete acts of individuals who introduce these structures, consolidate them, and make them difficult to remove. And thus they grow stronger, spread, and become the source of other sins, and so influence people's behavior. What John Paul II is saying here is that though sin is always a personal choice and it can never be pinned on something abstract like the society, it is also true that individual and personal sins, especially from people who hold positions of power, can become institutionalized. And from then on, they become a part of the system, the way things work. And this creates a vicious cycle. What starts with individual sins becomes normalized and then numbs other people's consciences so that it's more likely that they will also choose this particular sin. And this reinforces and perpetuates the structures that create sin. In this sense, structures of sin are the complete opposite of integral human development. While the latter builds people up, the former keeps people down and unable to thrive. Interestingly, Leo XIV has already shown that he is acquainted with this concept. Though he was quoting Paul VI and not John Paul II, Leo echoed this idea in a message for the Social Week of Peru, where he said, the gospel has sufficient potential to bring forth renewing forces which, transforming men from within, move them to change whatever structures are necessary to make them more just and more humane. The next principle that I would like to touch on is human ecology. And here I admit I'm cheating a little because this principle was actually introduced also by John Paul II in his encyclical Centesimus Annus in celebration of the 100th year of Rerum Novarum. In that encyclical, John Paul II says that though many people are rightfully concerned about the destruction of the natural environment, not many people seem concerned about the destruction of what he calls the human environment. As he puts it, not only has God given the earth to man, but man too is God's gift to man. But the Pope, who actually developed this idea of human ecology to its full potential, was Benedict XVI. He adopted this idea wholeheartedly and spoke about it very often throughout his pontificate, much more than John Paul II. One of the clearest and most detailed examples comes from Benedict's excellent encyclical Caritas in Veritate, and this deserves to be quoted in full. Just as human virtues are interrelated, such that the weakening of one places others at risk, so the ecological system is based on respect for a plan that affects both the health of society and its good relationship with nature. In order to protect nature, it is not enough to intervene with economic incentives or deterrents. Not even an apposite education is sufficient. These are important steps, but the decisive issue is the overall moral tenor of society. If there is a lack of respect for the right to life and to a natural death, if human conception, gestation, and birth are made artificial, if human embryos are sacrificed to research, the conscience of society ends up losing the concept of human ecology, and along with it, that of environmental ecology. It is contradictory to insist that future generations respect the natural environment when our educational systems and laws do not help them to respect themselves. And here, this is structures of sin. The book of nature is one and indivisible. It takes in not only the environment, but also life, sexuality, marriage, the family, social relations, in a word, integral human development. Our duties towards the environment are linked to our duties towards the human person, considered in himself and in relation to others. It would be wrong to uphold one set of duties while trampling on the other. Herein lies a grave contradiction in our mentality and practice today, one which demeans the person, disrupts the environment, and damages society. And what becomes clear in this passage is that it's not only human ecology and environmental ecology that are interconnected. All these Catholic social doctrine principles that I mentioned are intertwined. Now, it's important not to misunderstand Pope Benedict's point here. He was not trying to downplay nor dismiss the concept of environmental ecology when he introduced this concept of human ecology. In fact, Benedict was called the Green Pope at his time because he was the first pope to make the Vatican city-state fully self-sustainable in terms of energy. Rather, what Benedict was doing was expanding the concept of ecology to its fullest expression. As he said in an address to the Bundestag in 2011, the importance of ecology is no longer disputed. We must listen to the language of nature, and we must answer accordingly. Yet, I would like to underline a point that seems to me to be neglected today as in the past. There is also an ecology of man. Man too has a nature that he must respect and that he cannot manipulate at will. Man is not merely self-creating freedom. Man does not create himself. He is intellect and will, but he is also nature. And his will is rightly ordered if he respects his nature, listens to it, and accepts himself for who he is, as one who did not create himself. In this way and in others is true human freedom fulfilled. As of now, I've been unable to track any instance of Pope Leo XIV using this term of human ecology, even in an implied way, but give it time. Given how central it has been to church social doctrine, I'm pretty sure that it is bound to reemerge again during this pontificate. And this brings me to the fourth and final principle, the one that we got from Pope Francis, which is the idea of common home. Francis introduced this concept in his very first and programmatic apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, where he said that the earth is our common home and all of us are brothers and sisters. But just like integral human development became the central theme around which Populorum Progressio revolves, so too common home became the central topic of Francis's first social encyclical, Laudato Si. I mean, it's right there in the subtitle of the document. Francis explains it like this. There is a growing conviction that the planet is our homeland and that humanity is one people living under one common home. In short, we need to take care of the earth because that's where everyone lives. And when the earth is damaged, it's always the poorest among us that suffers first. Rather, we must tend to the earth so that it will produce enough resources so that everyone can achieve their integral human development. But this concept of common home actually points to something even deeper. Now, if God created the earth as a common home for us, that means that creation comes from God and thus must be respected. Creation is sacred. And that means that God gave it to us not for us to act as tyrants, but as stewards. And by the way, this was not an innovation from Pope Francis. John Paul II had already written in his encyclical Evangelium Vitae, as one called to till and look after the garden of the world, Man has a specific responsibility towards the environment in which he lives, towards the creation, which God has put at the service of his personal dignity, of his life, not only for the present, but also for future generations. It is the ecological question, ranging from the preservation of the natural habitats of the different species of animals and of other forms of life, to human ecology, properly speaking. And by the way, this was also what Benedict XVI was hinting at when he said that man must respect his own nature because he does not create himself. As you can see, all of these principles are interconnected, and what the magisterium has put together, let no man put asunder. But it also goes in the opposite direction. As Pope Francis said in Laudato Si, the acceptance of our bodies as God's gift is vital for welcoming and accepting the entire world as a gift from the Father and our common home. Whereas thinking that we enjoy absolute power over our own bodies turns, often subtly, into thinking that we enjoy absolute power over creation. Learning to accept our body, to care for it, and to respect its fullest meaning is an essential element of any genuine human ecology. Also, valuing one's own body in its femininity or masculinity is necessary if I'm going to be able to recognize myself in an encounter with someone who is different. And following Pope Francis' lead, Pope Leo XIV has already used the expression common home many times during his first 100 days as a pontiff. Namely, I would like to highlight one address that he did to representatives of other churches and religions, where he said, "In a world wounded by violence and conflict, each of the communities represented here brings its own contribution of wisdom, compassion, and commitment to the good of humanity and the preservation of our common home. I am convinced that if we are in agreement and free from ideological and political conditioning, we can be effective in saying no to an economy that impoverishes peoples and the earth, and yes to integral development." And on this note, I would like to end with a prayer from Pope Leo XIV during his Holy Mass for the care of creation. At the beginning of Mass, we prayed for conversion, our own conversion. I would like to add that we should pray for the conversion of the many people inside and outside the Church who do not yet recognize the urgent need to care for our common home. As we enter this new pontificate, which promises to give many more and new insights on church social doctrine, let's also get acquainted with these four principles so that we may better understand what Pope Leo is saying when he expounds on Catholic social doctrine. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like and subscribe so that you will be updated whenever a new video is released. I will also leave in the video description below links to all the papal documents and interventions that I mentioned throughout this video, as well as a link to my personal website, pedrogabrielwriter.com, where you'll be able to learn more about my books and other activities. That's all for today. God bless and see you soon.